Assalamu alaikum and welcome to Open Dialogue. I have today with me a lineup of guests and inshallah we'll be joined by more later on in the show. But as you know, I have been having a series of shows regarding social issues. I work with clients individually, and so I have now come to light wanting to raise awareness for certain issues so that everyone can gain knowledge and awareness and new learning. Today we're going to be discussing the challenges that the youth face today, and especially the Muslim youth, and what is it that they actually are feeling and going through in this day and age. What are the pressures, and most importantly, how to overcome them and the solutions for that. It is not just for the youth, for them to actually hear, it is actually affects us all. It doesn't matter if you've got children or not, we have a responsibility as individuals, as believers. Being in the community, we can always make a difference, whether it is for society as a whole, as parents, or just being a youth yourself. So inshallah, the show will give you a little bit of highlights with regards to some of the issues and how to overcome them. And this is a live call-in show, so please do share your views, do call in with your comments or questions. And I just want to quickly introduce my guest today. I have Sheikh Haneef. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam wa
Thank you so much for joining me. I know it's been
pleasure.
a long day at work and you come, especially for the show, and I really appreciate that.
Thank you very much.
I also have with me Dr. Yusra Ahmed. Assalamu alaikum.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Thank you so much for coming, and
pleasure.
you've driven all the way from Manchester
I have
to be
indeed.
with me today. I
have
really,
indeed.
really
I've had the pleasure.
so
Thank you.
honoured. Thank you so
It's a
much.
pleasure.
So let's just go right into it. Basically, we know that it's very vast. The topic, Sheikh, we know you've been working for many years in your career, and I want to get different insights and perspectives because we've all got different ways of looking at it. So what is it that you've come across that you feel that our youth are facing today as their challenge?
Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. I think one of the biggest challenges is basically the challenge that we all face, which is managing our Islamic identity or Islamic practice in an aggressive secular environment.
Absolutely.
Where Islam is seen as the major enemy to progress or to social stability or security or patriarchy, and so forth. I think that's the major problem.
But do you think with our youth today, with so much knowledge and awareness and even social media being part of the problem, but actually giving more information that actually with mainstream media, that is not really, even though we have that is not really controlling them because they are thinking more deeper, they are getting more curious. Do you think that's part of certain youth, or could there be something deeper to that?
I think there is something quite understandable about it. Our youth are seeking deeper answers because they have deeper challenges, and unfortunately, one of our problems is that the youth are not getting the answers that they need.
Yeah.
You see, not necessarily the answers they seek, but the answers they need, and it might be the same answer that would have been mentioned 1400 years ago, but they need it in a different format. You see, and I think that's the biggest problem that they might be having right now.
Okay. Dr. Yusra, I know you work with youth and obviously in your profession as well, but obviously having your own experience, what do you see generally the issues that the youth face today?
I think there's a lot of challenges really, mainly to do with youth and crime, youth and problems faced in the homes, social issues mainly, which can affect them in various ways. So, there's not just the challenges psychologically, but it will affect their mental health, for example. It also affects their health generally, can affect their oral health and other things as well. And I think they just need a bit more support really, and for us to engage with them a little bit more to be able to provide that.
Absolutely. You've raised some really, really interesting points which I'd like to get back to. But before we do, I also want to welcome to our show today Father Frank Geli.
Hi.
Hi, how are you? Thank you so much for coming and joining me today.
It's lovely to be here.
Oh, thank you so much. And of course, the renowned Sheikh Razavi. Thank you so much. Always a pleasure to sit with you. I am so privileged today to be sitting with a phenomenal guest panel here. Honestly, it's my pleasure to be with the Sayyid. He's literally a walking encyclopedia. I learned so much, but to have all of you together today is such an honor. Thank you so much, all of you. For the new guests that have just arrived, we've been talking about youth challenges that are faced today. And as we were talking, I remember you and me on the telephone, Father Geli, that you were quite concerned, and we came up with this idea of discussing the youth issues today. So what is it in your experience, and what is it that you see that our youth are facing today that is a problem that we together need to gather in society, as individuals, as parents, to sort of highlight the issues and hopefully come together with some solutions?
Well, actually, funnily enough, recently what was brought home to me is the impact. It's a funny way of coming at it, because of course primarily it's problems like knife crime, problems like poverty, exclusion, mental illness, deprivation, but also the impact on the economy. Because a friend of mine teaches English to foreign students in Bournemouth, and he told me if someone pulled a knife on some young people at Bournemouth bus stations, because of that reason there are fewer German students who are coming to Bournemouth to study English. So my friend doesn't have as much teaching to do. Now, this may sound piffling, but it just brought home to me how there are reverberations of violence in a wider society, even because after all the UK, the tourist contribution to the UK economy is huge. But let's, primarily, of course, I'm a man of cloth, a man of faith, and so I'm aware of the problem which disaffected youth, a youth which is led astray, poses for the welfare of society at large. I was also reading today in the Times was an article concerning the large number of unqualified, unregistered schools which cater for young people who have been expelled, excluded from school because of behavior and so on.
Yes.
And so then again, apparently there's a high percentage of those kids who go on to offend from a point of view of knife crime, drugs and so on. And what about, what is the government doing? I mean, I read this outrageous thing that they want to have fried chicken boxes handed out with words, anti-knife crime awareness. Now, is that serious, or is that a joke, or what? And all these ads, even in tube stations, London wants you to stay alive and so on, are not really a great help. Nor is much of a help what Boris Johnson, disastrous man who is now leading the country even more astray, he's had 20,000 more cops in the streets and so on. But that is not dealing with the root of a problem.
Exactly, there's a deeper issue, absolutely.
Yes.
I have actually done some research myself, and also I have gathered that they are actually injecting some funds as well to sort of educate teachers so that they could be more aware of some mental illnesses within schools. So that's one sort of like area that they are looking into, because I think the mental illness amongst the young has now increased, and that again is also due to many very deep-rooted issues. Before we move on, I also want to introduce Sayyid Razavi into the conversation with regards to faith. Now, we as believers, we have a responsibility to teach in a particular way, and we have the rules. But I come across a lot of parents now, actually even themselves are sort of debating whether or not faith is actually the answer to the new generation. And obviously we know that it is, but do we need to educate ourselves in the correct way, or does the education system within the Islamic way or any faith needs to be reformed in order for it to be a practical use because it's not necessarily working in this day and age where people are finding themselves more isolated or by the rules of, you know, wrong and forbidden and things that are making them less and less inclined to actually follow their religion. What is that? And what is the opinion?
Yeah, I wanted to add on the comment Father Frank Geli mentioned that any religion without moral teachings is useless.
Of course.
If you just teach texts, or you just teach laws,
Yeah.
and if you just teach theories without teaching moral values, it would not lead the society anywhere. So it's very important that we take care of that in our society. There is actually a hadith, although the hadith may look very simple. The hadith says, it's from Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that if you want to be successful, try to be kind to others.
Yes, a
Try
simple,
to be
formula.
lenient to others. And then it says that if you want success in your business, this is the method. If you want to be successful with your students, this is the way. If you want to be successful in anything that you do in your life, you have to adopt that policy. Without that, you will not reach anywhere. So we have a duty, whether Muslim or non-Muslim, or even an atheist. If an atheist wants to impose his point of view without ethics,
Yeah,
he will not
morals.
reach anywhere.
Of course, the morals are important. Sheikh Haneef, I know that you have classes with the youth as well, a lot, and I've sat in one of them. So you do come into contact, and I know it's obviously teaching Islamic studies, or there's many more that you are involved in. What do you see that could be the issue of the way in which religion may be conflicting and it's not actually being practically used the way it should be used, and some youth are not actually gaining from the knowledge? Is it the teaching? Is it their belief system? Is it, you know, parents not, you know, instilling certain things? What is happening? Or do you think that society does have a more of an influence than the blind faith or parents or whatever it may be?
Well, thank you for putting all that responsibility on my shoulders.
No, we will split it, don't worry. We've got enough people to discuss, but just from a small perspective that you may find.
I think this modern world has burst upon the scene, exploded in our faces when it came into existence, right? The modern world, when we define it to be the world that is dominated by secularism, for example, where the religion of the day is science, you know, that is quite recently exploded in our faces and has left us religious communities a bit stunned, you know, as to how to respond.
Yeah, we're not really keeping up.
Exactly. You know, when we look at education, you know, one very important defining characteristic about education is education must have a certain type of relevance to the environment in which that education is taking place. All
Do you
right?
think that our Islamic education is in keeping with the environment or
I
the
don't
current
think so.
situation?
No, I don't think so.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
I don't think so. Not as the Islamic education per se in this society, but also I think all other religions are struggling with the same thing. You know,
Tradition just wants to prevail.
yes, you see, and I think what we are dealing with here is presenting the same time-honored truths in response to questions, but the formulation of it, the contextual environment, whether it be intellectual or whether it be social, in which that presentation of that timeless truth is to be made, has to take into consideration these aspects, and they do not. you know, and to quote the Sayyid, you know, much of the teachings are basically suspended away from sort of reality.
Yeah.
You know, they teach
practical.
morality, for example. People teach morality in a vacuum. You see, without relevance to the environment in which it takes place.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think once you have that type of a thing, you know, it's quite easy for youth to stereotype religion, for them not to feel to feel alienated because they are not getting the answers that they need. And when I say answers, I don't just simply mean the intellectual answers, I also mean the emotional answers.
Yeah,
you know,
absolutely.
the culturally relevant answers. You know, they're not getting those answers that they need. And I think this is what leads to a certain type of alienation from religion. I think also, you know, I think religious communities also need to exploit the individualism of the society.
Of course,
You know what I mean?
We all
not
just one.
that
Yeah.
you want to enshrine it, but you can take it and you can make it into something positive, in the sense that you find a lot of people in the society tends to sort of wear their beliefs on their sleeve, right? I'm a this, I'm a that. I mean, you know, the whole idea of identity politics and so on revolves around this type of thing.
Of course.
Right? You know, what do you call it? Instagram and Snapchat and all these types of things. Again, show you this type of I'm this, I'm that. You follow my group. You know, that kind of thing. And
I use it in a positive way because I am on Snapchat and Instagram, and
yeah,
you're going to be on that tonight as well.
I'm not saying in general it is,
Yes,
it
no,
is
of
wrong.
course.
I'm not saying that at all. Right? I'm talking about elevating the personality
Of course.
some kind of, you know, star.
Yeah.
You know
But I
what I
think
mean?
we can use that.
Of course we could.
use that.
I'm not saying that's what
Yeah,
I'm talking
we can
about
use
right
it to
now.
our
How
advantage.
we use it.
Yeah.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
You know, and basically what I think is that youth, especially religious youth, need attitude. Okay? You got a whole bunch of trans kids walking around there with attitude. All right? And then you walk around with attitude, everybody falls right into step. You know, because everybody loves somebody with attitude. You know, I am who I am who I am, and you know, it's too bad for you if you don't like who I am. That's your problem.
I think with
you know
Islam,
what I'm saying?
maybe, or certain religions, there are this inferiority complex as well.
Well, yeah, I think in again, secular dominated society, you find a lot of religions on the defensive. A lot
Yeah,
of religions
especially now.
taking a sort of a diminutive role. You know what I mean? No, I don't want people to know I'm religious, that type of thing, because
Exactly.
I'm so
You're not proud.
ashamed of being religious. You know,
The way in which
when
it's
in
being
fact you should be wearing your religion on your head.
Well, I hope that some youth are listening, or even parents, and I do encourage you to speak, because we are only coming from our own perspectives, and there's plenty of the perspectives out there. So please do call in. It's a live show. Give me your real experience, even you as a youth. What is it that you are going through? And that brings me on nicely to Yusra. Dr. Yusra, we were talking earlier, and I think aside from, you know, just the religious aspect, you know, we have to also understand that the youth are sometimes just judged without being understood, without being heard. And you've done some studies with regards to, you know, their psychology and the mental state, and how we need to take responsibility for that. So could you share some
Absolutely.
insight?
So first and foremost, I mean, the youth today are sort of stuck between culture and society and religion, and it's hard to differentiate between the two. And we're the ones, say, that have been brought up in the UK who do have religious beliefs are sort of stuck in a midst of what do they actually do? Do they actually follow what culture is telling them to do?
Right.
Do they follow what their religion's telling them to do? And there's that conflict. That can cause mental conflict, emotional conflict as well.
Right.
Obviously the problems that they're facing have a detrimental effect, and like we discussed before, there are a lot of mental health issues that are going on, and unfortunately there's not as much funding that's being pumped into that area of the medical field, which is a shame really, because it's an area that's growing, and there are a lot more, like you said, that are being diagnosed with mental problems and mental issues, both emotional and mental.
But that's just like society helping us, for example, the schools. Now, what about in our homes and parents?
I think at home, for parents to be educated first is the most
absolutely.
important thing, with it being from a religious point of view, which then they can portray to their children, but also for them to look at ways in which they can engage with their children in a way to be able to pass the information on for the children to actually take on. Things like just befriending them, being as close to them, emotionally attached to them, being sort of aware of their children's lives and engaging with them a lot more. I think that's very important. I think when parents are distant and they're busy in their own lives, in their own work, and busy doing what they're doing, the child feels neglected, and therefore they will look at other things and they will look at other ways to release pressures, or if they have any issues that they're having.
And the home has changed. There's a lot
Absolutely.
of single unit homes as well at the moment.
Absolutely.
And not to say that that cannot work, but it just means that the parents need to be extra careful with regards to being present. I mean, there's two parents that can be in the household and still not be present for the child. So I think being parents nowadays also is a skill. You need to understand their psychology of a child, or in order to transfer information in the correct way. Because even though we have both even parents working or single parent homes, if you give the quality time and the right sort of information and the right sort of ways of dealing with certain aspects that they may be going through different stages and having that understanding, it can still
then
work.
we can reduce the risk. Absolutely.
Absolutely.
So there's been some studies that have shown that absent fathers, for example, in children's lives can or does have a detrimental effect on boys, for example, and they're more likely to go out and have, they're more likely to commit a crime, to go out, form gangs or other issues. And obviously that risk decreases within the father's presence. So the more the father is involved in their life, the more the studies have shown that they're less likely to actually commit crimes. The other issue stands where if a mother is absent from a child's life, then there are detrimental effects emotionally. So the studies are showing that if the child is away from their mother up to the age of 3, there's a very detrimental effect on that child's well-being, on their emotional well-being, emotional attachment issues, which then stem into adulthood as well. And that's where they start looking into other things. Again, mental illness comes into it, etc.
Not dealing with
so
relationships
not dealing
in the
with it in that sense. The other issue, again, that you've mentioned is even though families are together when there is conflict in the home, that will have a detrimental effect on the child's upbringing and well-being as well. So although they are together and they're still living together, the fact that there's conflict there will have an effect on an adverse effect on the children's well-being too. So I think the whole conclusion of the study was that the most ideal situation would be that a child should be brought up in a home where it is stable, where there are two parents present. I know that's not always the case now in this day and age, but even when parents are not together or are separated or are divorced, the fact that the two parents engage with together and work together to be able to co-parent and be able to raise their children in the correct way and be able to support their children and be there for their children will then consequently have a really good effect on the child's upbringing, and therefore they are less likely to engage in crime and other issues as well.
Father Geli, do you see that if there are crime or if there are sort of problems within the youth, that it comes from maybe a particular background, sect, or do you think that it could be something to do with like single parent homes? What is it like in your experience from what you've known?
Well, I mean, all those factors do play a role, but I really wanted to move on to the remedies.
Okay, sure.
And I would say that what we people of faith, what we have to offer the youth are these master ideas. I would want to say also mythical ideas, which actually we all have in our religions. In the ancient world, education was based on teaching children the great Homeric myths, the Odyssey and the Iliad, and those great heroes who were not perfect, were flawed, but they represented some sort of model.
Role models, yes.
Now, what have we got here? I was thinking, Jesus told the parable of a prodigal son, which is a story about a young man who asked his father, give me half of the inheritance, I want to go and live my own life. And his father does, and the boy goes out to a far country, spends all his money on bad things, and then he's pauperized, is hungry, starved, and he has to hire himself out to a man who keeps pigs, which is very significant. Those details are very, very important, because in a particular allegorical interpretation of this parable, the man is the devil. The young man is hired himself out to the devil, and he's so reduced, so low, that he feeds himself like pigs on acorns, until he comes to his senses. I'll go back to my father and say, I've sinned against heaven and against you, please take me back. And the father does. And this is allegorical because it's emblematic not only of many young people who are misled by the lures of this world, but also emblematic of a condition, a human condition, because human beings always try to go after false gods and misled by demonic forces. So, I mean, that's a story, but it's a very powerful story. And there are stories which Muslim can tell.
Yeah, I'm going to bring the Sayyid for that.
You know, we got to offer these great myths, these great tales, these great stories, and give them inspiration. And then after that, we can have, you know, the algorithms, so to speak, you know, how the set of instructions. But we need to have these visions of a good life.
Sayyid, we have that, especially in our sect, you know, especially with Muharram coming on, we have, you know, the rituals. Of course. And we do it very powerfully. And the rituals are there, the majalis is there, the role models are highlighted, all of the lessons are there. But do you find that, is it just ritual then at the end of the day, or are we really gaining from the lessons? I mean, it's really like fitting with what's about to happen. Are we really learning as a society, or are we just practicing this, you know, as machines now and again? And what more can we do to make it more practical, that as Muharram enters and Ramadan and all the great events, and we talk about these role models, how can we use that more for ourselves as well as the youth?
Yeah, I mean, we end up discussing this every year before Muharram, and again this subject has come up. Unfortunately, our gatherings have all become very ritual and traditional.
Yes.
And they do not convey the message that Imam Hussein ﷺ wanted us to convey. We, especially the speakers and the reciters of the Noha and Marthia, and they should compose poems that give message. I mean, if you look at the poems written by the old generation of the poets, they used to convey the message. They didn't used to just play with the feelings of the people.
Yes.
But unfortunately nowadays it has all become a kind of business. And it would not be wrong to say that some people have made the blood of Imam Hussein as a business.
Yes,
to
absolutely.
Earn money or attract
some sort of status,
people and funds and this and that, which is wrong. We should be concentrating in passing the message of Imam Hussein during these majalis which are coming up.
Absolutely. Sheikh Haneef, what sort of solutions do you think we can sort of take forward to reform our majalis, to make it more practical for the youth? Because the youth are very much involved, but again, people like to belong and they like to be part of some sort of group, and that is a good group to be in. But then don't just be in that group when it's that time of year, or just in that actual center, but when you go outside it and walk outside it, because we've seen fights, we've seen people, act and behave in a particular way, literally minutes after they've left that door. So how can we change that attitude, especially amongst the youth?
It's very interesting. You mentioned it, and the side mentioned the distinction between emotions and knowledge. I think it's very, very, very significant. Why? Because we are living at a time of disillusion. We are living at a time when we are moving towards the coming of the Antichrist or the Dajjal.
Right,
okay, we are living at a time where, for example, as we see, you have governments that are led by people who are inferior to the lowest of their own people, like in Brazil or in America and so forth. We're living at this time We live in a time, and what we're talking about here is not something unique to us. Okay, if you look at, for example, the kind of music that they play in the Christian church right now, you know, they have to sort of incorporate a rock type of a format, for example, right? And the singers are always about how they feel, emotion, right? How they feel about God and how they feel about Jesus and how they feel and how they feel, right? It's not about knowledge anymore, right? It's not about uplifting a person's spirit on an objective level, right? It's trying to bring people, draw them into this individualistic representation of religion. Okay, it's the same thing that's happening to us. I think what we need to be doing, I think it might all have to go back to an educational program, but not completely, because we have to look at the parents, the family as well. Okay, absolutely. But in terms of educational program, it's very, very important, because an educational program will teach our children how to think. You see, how to conceptualize, how to be able to distinguish between, for example, the efficacy of emotion and the efficacy of knowledge, how to be able to expand the range of conceptualization, right? What you find right now is our children are being caught up in the standard or general mode of social expression, right? Yes. Which is all about emotions and not about knowledge. You know, so I think we really should invest in that, because if you look, it is now becoming the new battleground between the forces of evil that want to brainwash our children, you know, in thinking along certain lines, you know, and those of us who would like to rescue them from that. And it is now, the showdown is now, and I think we need to put some more investment into teaching, not just teaching Muslims. I mean, teaching everybody.
Well, Islam is not just for the Muslims, it is for everyone. Yeah. And religion generally is, I think, the basis of it, and the foundation is very much similar and, you know, unique in that sense when you have the foundations set. So I think, you know, we need to be more representing what our beliefs are, and the way in which we do that is quite difficult. And so, coming to you, Dr. Yusra, how practical is it for us to be there for our children, to teach them, to actually bring on that balance of emotion as well as learning, and not just learning with education, but learning as in really understanding, because it's about having that meaning.
Absolutely.
And obviously with different stages it does differ, and for parents it's really difficult.
Very difficult, especially in this day and age, because both parents generally are working, so there's very little time. That's just one issue. Yeah. But then trying to find the time aside of that after they come home to sit down with their children, and again, like you've just mentioned, children can be of various ages, so what you say to one child will have to differ when you say it to another child because of their mental capacity. So I think as a general rule, I think as parents we should be mirroring this kind of behaviour to our children first.
Yes.
So that what we do, they will then pick up directly.
Absolutely.
And then using that then to educate them in an indirect way and a direct way. So finding time, even if it's 10 minutes before bedtime, just to have a simple conversation with each of your children, depending on how many you have, but trying to find the time to actually sit down just to get them to think. It's all about getting them, like you know, like you mentioned, getting them to think by themselves. So planting the seed and then getting them to think, right, okay, why am I doing this? Why would I do this? My mother does this, my father does this, and getting them to think along those lines. And again, the most important thing is for you to set the example and for them to be able to follow.
That's the crucial point, actually, is you being the role model first. And I think a lot of parents really need to step up.
Yes.
And it's not just enough to say you want a family and so many kids. Yeah. It is a responsibility. It is a real deep-rooted responsibility, especially amongst the faith. Yeah. And I think we need to really highlight this, because there are parents that are taking it so lightly.
Absolutely.
And their children are suffering for it. And you will be accountable for that, by the way.
Absolutely. But some parents do communicate with their children, but in an incorrect way.
Yes.
So they may show too much emotion as opposed to showing direct, you know, taking a different approach and being logical, giving them the appropriate knowledge. So it's all well and good sitting next to a child and talking to them for 10-15 minutes, but if that child isn't engaging or not listening to you, they're not going to take anything in that you're talking about. So
Sayed, what is the responsibility of parents? Like a lot of them, they say up to a certain age, yes, I can give them that. But once they come to a certain age, it's not my responsibility anymore. Is that correct in Islam? Is that something that we, lose the rights as parents to and be accountable for them? How much responsibility does the scripture say that we have, and to what extent?
As far as responsibility is concerned, they always have responsibility until they die.
Okay, so that
Parents
influence is
have
important.
responsibility for children, and children have responsibility for their parents.
Yes.
But as far as conveying the message and the stages of education, there are rules and regulations. I mean, advice. There is nothing.
So at what age would you say?
There's nothing compulsory. Like there are narrations which say that up to 7 years let them play.
Yeah, of
enjoy.
course, the different stages.
Second 7 years, you teach them everything.
Right.
Third 7 years, be friends with them.
Mm-hmm.
The only way to convey a message to a 14-year-old up to 21-year-old is by being friend. But this will not be possible until you have educated them first in the previous 2 stages.
Okay.
So if you have failed in those 2 stages, you wouldn't be successful in the 3rd stage.
Thank you for that. Sorry, we do have a caller online. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam to all of you and all the brothers and sisters that are watching.
Thank you so much for calling. Would you like to say what was your statement?
Yeah, my comment is when we were growing up, when we were at school, we had teachers that motivated us, that were interested in what our views were and helped us to represent that. Nowadays, you look at some of the students out there and you look at them and you think, like, where are the people that are motivating? They seem to don't have any expectations, any opportunities for them. We're living in a country where, cutting a long story short, we live in a segregated educational system. I've seen teachers myself whose expectations in the affluent areas are a lot higher for the children that go to those schools, and where the children that come from the deprived areas, the teachers' expectations are a lot lower. So if that is going on in our country at the moment, these issues that are affecting the students are naturally going to happen because they don't see that hope that we seen when we were growing up. When we were growing up, we had diverse students in the classroom, diverse teachers. We had a range of views, and everyone's views were respected.
Right.
Nowadays, there just seems to be one narrative. You get through the exams, and that's it. And these exams aren't suited for every child. We are not all homogenous. We're all human beings. We've all got diverse abilities, and that isn't recognised. A student, my own view, a student that has graduated, has just graduated. I'm sorry to say, just because you've graduated, you've got that paper, that does not mean you're an educated individual.
Yes.
All it means you were fortunate enough to be able to get the questions that you had memorized the answers for. Mm-hmm. And this is something that nobody wants to discuss. Our institutions, educational institutions now, have become financial institutions. All they're doing is generating money from the students. A student that goes in and comes out with the amount of money they've got to pay for, 20, 30, 40,000 pounds for an education system. That doesn't say to me that the system is working for the students and working for our futures.
Yes, no, absolutely. Thank you. Sorry, he got cut off. Did you hear what he said? Yes. Yes, the education system is becoming more institutionalized, and we don't have much say, as we know, even with certain things that are being taught in the curriculum. It's becoming less and less where it's orientated around the self. It's more about how the system and how secularism is. Does anybody have any more comments on that? I'm not going to direct it to anyone, but anyone.
Well, I think you're absolutely right. I think before we had a classic education that encouraged people to think. And I think out of that classic education, we had a lot of world leaders who came out of that.
Yes.
And student leaders and so forth. This has been slowly cut back over time. That's one thing. Another thing that you mentioned, the person mentioned, is in terms of lower expectations for people in more deprived communities and higher expectations for those that are in more upper class or affluent communities. I think this is why I think we need to empower our own people to teach, you know, because you know, stereotyping is a default position.
Absolutely.
Everybody falls into a stereotype, right? It's a default position, and you not belonging to a lower economic community, going in there, you would rely upon your stereotypes. You know what I mean? You would lower your expectations.
Depends on the individual.
Right? Of course, it depends on the individual, right? But in general,
Yeah, of course.
this is what's going to happen.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You need people who have a burning desire to uplift their community.
Definitely.
You know what I mean? And who have the skills to be able to do that. And I think what you need to do is we need to start working on an individual basis, basically, to create that cadre of people who can do that type of a thing. You know, you need to, for example, have, let's say, start off with weekend classes or weekend schools, evolve that into homeschooling programs, evolve that into camps, you know, and so forth, and you bring those homeschooling programs into an institution or something like that, you see? And you have to be able to sell teaching to the kids, you know, get the kids to be able to not to be afraid of math and these types of things, to be fluent in their expressions and so forth and so on. So I think where you start with is with our own community. We start with our own Islamic centers, for example.
Yes.
You know, and start raising questions as to what kind of education are we giving to our youth, and what can we do to fix that. You see, giving the resources that we have, the space that we have, the time that we have, and so forth. Because if you have at least one day in a week, you know, it's better than having none at all.
Absolutely.
For example.
It's really funny that
see?
you raised that point, actually, because I was on holiday recently in Malta, and I was talking to a local there, and I was just saying, you know, I was there, you know, thinking like, you know, what do they do with the children for so many weeks off and whatever, and they have a much longer term than even in England. They have maybe 2 months, and they're like, well, they have summer schools, and I'm thinking, you know, our Islamic centers can do the same, where it's not about, and they learn through play, and they learn through different stages and phases, and we should maybe implement that more in the time that we've got, because 6 weeks is a long time, and it's not just giving them the academics, but like you said, you know, bringing out different types of learning. And it's not about, the motivation, like the caller said, to bring out that personality and that character within that person. And maybe when they're in normal school, they don't get that type of learning, but when they have it in a different type of format, and it will help, you know, in that particular way, maybe that needs to be promoted, and that's something that we can take on
There's a difference
ourselves.
between teaching as a profession and teaching as a
Yes.
vocation.
Yes,
Right?
definitely.
And when you have teaching as a vocation, there's got to be some kind of organic relationship between the teacher and the student, or the community that that teacher is teaching.
Well,
You know
that's
what I'm
true, but
saying?
that teacher also needs to be supported. So there are
That's
teachers
right.
out there in certain areas that are trying their best to
That's
be able
true.
to deliver, but they don't have the backing, or they don't have
That's
the
what I mean by being institutionalised.
they don't have the support that's needed. So therefore, their word isn't spoken. That they're literally, you know, sort of quietened down, and people don't engage with them. And that's why it's so important to have that backing.
One of the astonishing things about the English educational system is this massive gap between private education, fee-paying schools, and state schools. Only 7% of British school kids go to private fee-paying schools, but they are disproportionately represented at the level of elites.
Yes.
The army, the top ranks of the army,
Yes.
Judges, top civil servants,
Definitely.
even business.
Coming
You
out
will
of
find
Eton.
disproportionate
Yeah.
number of
Yeah.
public school boys.
Yes, absolutely.
Now, the system was created at the time, let's be quite brutal about it, when Britain had a worldwide empire, and you needed administrators who were taught to feel, to be, you know, good chaps,
Yeah.
and to go into the colonies and push around the natives and get them to work for the sake of the empire. That was the purpose of the private schools. George Orwell wrote a wonderful book, incredibly topical, Burmese Days, in which he makes it quite clear what the purpose was. Now, and of course he himself was an old Etonian, and now we got an old Etonian at the helm of this country, who is taking this country down into an abyss, incidentally. And it's a little Freemasonry, it's a little
Yes.
mafia, which is actually very powerful, especially the Conservative Party, especially the Tory
Absolutely.
Party.
Yes,
And
yes.
now, what can we say when so many, and even people who belong, so to speak, let's say minority, can afford it, they would have a stampede to try to send their offspring to their schools because they learn to belong to a master race. But now, what the hell how can you justify? Everybody swears up and down we believe in equality, and we have an educational system which is based on the opposite.
Absolutely.
It's based on
yeah.
privilege.
Definitely.
I mean, until that is fixed, I can't see how we can actually go any further in terms of affirming the equality principles which are common to our religions.
And what about the Arabic schools? Do you find that we need a lot of catching up to do, or are we okay? And if we do need to catch up, as to which areas do we need to catch up with? Because I think with the knowledge behind what faith brings, it can be so powerful. But why isn't that power there? Because obviously I'm discussing youth. I brought this topic because this is the future generation. These are our future influencers and leaders. Now, what hope is there when we're not having those teachers in place and the real education in place for these future? So what can we do about even the Arabic schools? Because maybe if we were seen as the forefront in our own right, that could be something, to compete with, even with the elite. Do you think that's a possibility? And if so, how?
Fortunately, some of these Arabic schools are used, especially in relation to the girls. They send them there so they can get a better husband in future. But they can say that they have been to madrasa.
Yes. Yeah, let's be real, of course.
So,
It's very, very
the
standard
aim is not to teach them. I mean, I've seen
to be leaders, yeah.
mothers and parents who arrive at madrasa, they themselves are not that practicing,
Of
but they
course.
insist their children to go there. And when you ask them, this is what the answer is.
Yeah, because that'll be ticking the boxes when they're going to be
she
seen
has been
later
to
on.
madrasa.
Exactly.
I think a lot of the time the children don't actually want to go because they're
That's
being
the other
forced to
thing.
go.
That's the other
So we
thing.
have to try and find a way to encourage these children to be able to like it or to teach in Arabic schools in a particular way
That's
to
it.
engage the children a lot more, because at the moment everything's so traditional and so cultural and we have to do it one way, and they've got to learn this and they've got to learn more about the religion and they've got to learn more about their imma, and I think it's all about the basics rather than trying to teach them the complicated things. Start from the basics, start from the young age. Plant the seed again and then work their way up, as the Sayyid mentioned, start and deliver things aimed at the particular age groups to then be able to then, carry on.
Definitely. I have raised this before in many of my other shows as well as this, and I did say, the pressures that are put on the young in the Arabic school just so that they can go up and recite, when they're age 4, 5, and 6, and you don't realize the trauma, and even though some of them can do it, but the detrimental effects of it later on, and when they have to and they're accountable for the studying and the learning and the reading, then they want to give up because they've been forced into, instead of learning to love
And
our
enjoy it.
religion, learning to have that blind faith, because these are the surah or the ayah that's going to help you through things, and learn it through storytelling and making them understand the real meaning and the depth between and in between that all. And I particularly do give the assembly in my local Arabic school, and I talk to all the students before their classes every Saturday, and I try to make them feel proud and feel in a particular way of them being like sort of blessed to be in this sort of situation, because they could be playing at home but they can do that later on. But a lot of people would want that education because it's not just seen as learning Arabic or Quran, but the blessings behind it. The delivery is so important, and when it's so strict in some schools, which we're not going to name, but it's all about dressing in a particular way and doing things in a strict way, that the children really cannot wait to leave, and the learning is just about getting those marks, and that's about it. And even if they don't even care.
And they pleasing their parents at the end of the day.
And they're just pleasing their parents just to say, yes, we've done it. But they'll never continue. And even parents in my generation that have gone through that, and I've spoken to personally, they don't even want to send their kids to Arabic school because of the trauma that they felt themselves. So this is something, an eye-opener for the audience, for the Arabic schools, that we do need to reform. If we do not reform, what do we have for our future?
How could you reform?
the style of teaching, the delivery of teaching, like I mentioned, also making it not just about, just like how we said, the vocation. It's about learning to love and understand. It's, you know, religion is not just about the scriptures. And if you go into the scriptures, but take out things from the scriptures that you can relate to them in a particular way.
Well, then
That's
teaching
what
them
it's
in
about.
modern society
Yeah,
as well.
and I
engaging
gave a
with in modern
whole
society.
series talking about all the prophets, for example, last September to the, you know, till we finished in June, July. And I spoke about the prophets, not just giving the stories, but telling them how they could use it today. And that's what they can do, and that's what they could be. And that was my idea. And now for the next one, I'm thinking of maybe, I haven't told the Arabic school yet, but you'll know, obviously talking and mentioning each of the names of Allah, and taking that word and knowing what that means and try to represent it with ourselves. Now, are we taught like that? Are we showing these kids in that way? No, we're not. It's very simple logic, and you know, that's what I use when it comes to teaching, when it comes to reading, because you know, you use your own experience, or you talk to the students and you understand, instead of saying that they're just students or they're just the youth and they are misunderstood, really. That's what it's about. I engage.
The best thing to do is to speak
Yeah.
to the children directly and get their
Absolutely.
viewpoints and get what, you know, try to find what they want and then be able to deliver back to them.
I've been to centres like the Stanmore and Haydari, and I've spoken to students as well, and I've asked them what is it that they require, and they are so intellectual. It's amazing what they can give, and I find it so enlightening, but I don't think we are engaging, and especially when you find the scholars or certain people that are from the centres, they don't have that direct contact, and they don't have that invitation or that influence where they feel that they are inviting even, because it's just in a particular line, and again, it's like a cycle and a circle.
I think what you're illustrating here is basically cultural differences.
Absolutely.
Educational
Absolutely, but culture's always been a
practice.
problem in that way.
You know, because you find that, for example, in most of the Muslim world, you have this an authoritative or authoritarian type of tradition of education, you know, where it's largely by rote, you know, until you reach a certain level, then you can be a free thinker, right? And it worked for them. It sure worked for them. You know, here we're in a different paradigm.
Exactly.
Right, we're in a paradigm where you have a kind of, you know, education has become sort of democratized, right? You tailor education to the psychological, social, and also all these other needs of the student, right? Students are encouraged to criticize, for example,
Question even.
the question and so forth. And so, yeah, I mean, I am sold on that myself. That is the truth, right? And I think this is where we find frustration, you see, because in this environment where you have a different strategy of educational presentation, right? That old school type of practice creates a lot of frustration.
Absolutely.
Right? And alienation, because they are not getting the same, people are not getting the same kind of returns, put it that way, from that particular educational system, you see? And yes, I think you're absolutely right. I think one aspect of our educational system is that it has to be reformed. You know.
I'd like to be invited into every Arabic school because I know how to deal with students. They can be the most delinquent, but in my class, it's totally different from age 4 to 16 or any age. And you know what? There is a formula and there is a way. And they actually engage with me because I actually listen to them and I learn through them. And that's what teachers need to understand, that you can actually learn as to what that student is getting from you so that what you're teaching at the end of the day is going to be successful. Because you're actually having that dialogue, you're actually having that interaction. And it's nothing wrong, and especially our Arabic schools, the curriculum is set by not the system, by not secularism. So we have that way. Why can't we improve it? Why can't we sit together and discuss this and talk about this? And no one talks about this. I'm the only one that I've noticed that I actually brought up about the Arabic schools, and it's been carrying on for, you know, years and years and generations, and we are not improving. And our youth are going further and further away, that even parents at my age and even older are not sending their kids to Arabic school. And they were only worried about them being a doctor or a lawyer and thinking that that's the way forward.
And you know, out of personal interest, years ago, I went to evening classes of Arabic. And I think it's such a great language.
Of course.
You know, it's almost some kind of, how shall I say, pleasure I don't want to use the word erotic pleasure. But
You just did.
But I mean, in using some of those wonderful Arabic sounds, they do have, it's a holy language. It's a holy language. And I felt, although I didn't get very far because I'm lazy, but I mean, the Arabic, I remember, always feel a special pleasure in using those words.
It's a privilege to have
It's
as a
a
language.
privilege, but it's more than the language. It's so much more.
I should have said sensible.
It's fine. It's live. We cannot go back on it.
With respect to Arabic,
أنت مدرس.
if you sensual. I mean, for example, teaching Arabic, right? The mentality of people here, all right, in this society is when you're learning a foreign language, you're learning a foreign language to speak it.
Yes, not
Right?
that was hard. Yeah.
These kids are learning they're learning a foreign language or a holy language to be able to recite.
Yes, there's a difference, definitely,
You
especially in
see?
Arabic.
And it's all well and good to learn it to recite, but learning to recite doesn't activate all of those learning pleasure centers in the mind, if you know what I'm saying. It's more
course.
mechanical,
Definitely.
you see, right? And I think, for example, us teaching Arabic in this society, us teaching Arabic in Hausa, for example, could incorporate the spoken aspect of the Arabic, you see? Because what you're actually doing is you're creating a way by which you could have more community solidarity or community relationship by generating a common language, a common special language that we could communicate with each other, right? Yes, we all have Urdu backgrounds and Farsi backgrounds and other Pashto backgrounds and so forth, right? But in this environment, what we could be trying to do is we already have the English background as a universal language between ourselves, but also to try to incorporate Arabic as another aspect of that. So you're teaching your kids in weekend schools, not just how to read Arabic, but how to speak it with each other. So you have a class telling can I have a glass of water, please, or whatever.
Yes, like a proper
for these
lesson,
kids,
yes.
For these kids to be able,
Of course.
and these things create that type of dynamic thing, and it
And that's just one
satisfies their
aspect you mentioned,
emotional
actually,
intellectual
with the
needs.
language, because obviously in the Arabic schools, I know they are vast because they're also teaching not just the Arabic language, but they're teaching the surah, the ayah, they're teaching even, not the recitation, but they're teaching about salah. And again, a lot of these things are so vital, there's so much deeper meaning behind praying. But that's not emphasized. It's just like, no, you got to read it. If you don't read it, it's unlawful and you're going to be punished for it, for example, in a nutshell. Now, I just think that, teachers need to be qualified and, in a way, they need to sort of like give a story and give us some sort of meaning behind it so that they are actually doing it even behind when the parents are not in front of them. Because there's more in-depth meaning. When I give a story to these children and I explain to them, reciting a particular surah and how much blessing and walking out of the house and doing it, or when you're sitting in the car, or if you're sitting in an exam or you lost for words or you don't have that mind, you talk about these things in that way. It's powerful.
Yeah.
Exactly. These teachers are not talking like that, unfortunately. It is just, this is what you got to read. You have to do it by the end of the day. And I am generalizing. I'm sure there are a few that are doing as I'm saying, but majority of them are not. Because if you grew up knowing this power behind the ayah, behind the surah, behind your salah, I think as a youth and as an adult, we wouldn't have these issues because it does stem from childhood and it's not being taught in a particular way because, again, it's not understood in a particular way. If you practice it like how you mentioned being a role model yourself, and if you felt it yourself, you had the love for your creator, because there's different levels of faith. You do it because it's just, the law, or you do it because of fear of punishment, or you do it for the love of your creator. Now that's a different sense. Do we do that even teaching our children to love our creator instead of instilling that fear? These are the things that need, and I think with the youth, that's where that, there's that sort of separation.
Yeah.
The education is not just about the rituals. The education should be there, not just in Arabic school. It should be in between. Just like your salah is not just performed 5 times a day. It's in between your salah as to how you perform as an individual. Are we even taught that as
Well, not just that. I mean, you're performing your salah but you're taught to just do your 5 salat a day,
Yeah.
and you get up and you carry on with your life. But there's actually more to that. You being sat there on the sajada is so
Reflecting.
powerful, and it's beautiful. And for you to find that time to be able to do that it's the nicest feeling. And if you instill that in your children from an early age, they will actually go and find the time to do it instead of rushing it in a few minutes just because you have to do it.
Exactly.
So there's a lot of you've got to instill that, and you've got to teach them. They're not going to know that unless they see you doing it, or unless you teach them to do it. So
exactly, and we know that a lot of the issues, the mental issues, especially psychologists, and now that research have shown that all the issues that are stemming in adults are from childhood. So it's really important, as I can even say that how important are the early years, even in any faith, and especially in ours. It is shown and is said, and now only research is coming to show that, and also the importance of the parents' input.
I'd like to add one thing to it. I think environment is extremely important.
Absolutely.
You know what I mean? Because I have known families where they prayed in the house. You know, father and mother prayed. They had congregational prayer with their children in the house. Okay, and these kids grew up not praying. And the reason why they grew up not praying is because they were like a ultra minority in the school that they went to. All right, you know what I mean? There weren't too many Muslims there. Okay, and that environment in which they lived in, you know, it had a profound effect upon them. You know, these kids would not have been going to camps, for example. You know what I mean? They didn't go to, you know, too many community gatherings and so forth. And not only this, you know, to come out of your house and to see Abdullah across the street, you know, and this one across the street, and they're playing, you know, prayer time comes and everybody goes to pray, that has an effect upon them. You know, and if you really look in the classical world, how religion manifested itself in society, you know, you always had, for example, in big cities, you had the Armenian quarter, and you had the Jewish quarter, and you had the Muslim quarter, and you had the this quarter, and that quarter, meaning all these people from these different religions, you know, gather together in a particular place, you know, where they live together as a community. Even here in this society, this modern society right now, you can see some areas, for example, that you have a lot of Sikhs, for example, are found there. You know, some areas we have a lot of Hasidic Jews are found there. You know, some places we have a lot of Hindus are found there, and so forth. You have Edgware Road and all that kind of stuff where you have, for example, a lot of Muslims being found there, you know. And I think we need to take a page out of these guys' books, you know, try to encourage each other to colonize parts of the society, parts of the cities that we live in, you know, where we can establish a truly Islamic environment. Not that, you know, I wouldn't do the Salafi thing of...
I think there's got to be a balance, really.
I understand what you're saying, but
I'm not going to shut down bars for you.
No, I understand what you're saying, but I have
yeah.
a different view on that, because we have Islamic countries, okay, with all of that around them. Okay, and it's not about just praying, it's how you pray and how you teach that prayer. And I think also it's the way in which you as an individual are an influencer or influenced, and how you taught to be. Because I think a lot of people, even in a modern Western country, can practice their faith more with everything around them that is actually challenging, because they take it upon themselves to make a choice for themselves, and they're strong enough.
That's true for adults. Yeah, that's true for adults. But I'm talking about, let's say, for example,
even
a 10-year-old or an 8-year-old or something, you know, a 7-year-old, they need support.
Community.
Yes, they need community around them. Yeah,
yes,
yeah.
I do agree with that. Yeah. But I do feel that even communities that have grown up like that, that's why when they come from a different country and they come here and they're like, wow, we want this world and we want that, and they don't even practice as much coming from an Islamic country, being brought up from that community from a young age, whereas the Muslims that are being brought up here from a young age have more of a representation of Islam. So there is a conflict.
There has to be a battle. There are some youth or kids that have been brought up in an environment where they have been raised in a small community where they all have the same views and share the same viewpoints, and as they've grown into their and as they've grown into their teens, they've rebelled because they've been confined to this environment all their life, that there's external factors that are influencing them at the same time, and they're stuck again between what their friends are doing and what their parents are telling them to do. So I think there's got to be a balance, really, in that you don't want to push them too much and you don't want to just force them into an environment like this, but also to be able to get them to integrate with other cultures and other faiths, to be able to take the good out of that faith and that religion, and be able to take the good from your own faith and be able to bring it together. And therefore you can carry on with your own religion and faith as you get older, rather than go, unfortunately, into the opposite effects and rebel against your own.
As humans, we are obviously there in existence because we want to connect and we want to feel part of something, but we need to be raised as individuals and know our identity, know that what we stand for, and have a very strong core and foundation from a young age, and be proud of that identity and foundation, so that whatever comes afterwards, you will take the good, like you said, and take away even at a young age. Because, you know, I've been to even personal development courses that are teaching children from the young age of like 6, 7, you know, and they have stages till 12, and then teenagers, and then older, because they're instilling these distinctions as to how to live in this world and find and create your own meaning.
Aside
from
religion.
We have got that guidance in religion itself. And these are people which have no faith. So when you are brought up in a particular way, because it's very easy to generalize being in a home with, you know, and you always find the most religious families, so-called religious families, their children are not really following it, because maybe that family is religious for society but not in their own home. And the way in which that religion or that lecture or that is being, you know, taught is not, it's just for a speech, but not necessarily, like you said, you know, represented in their own way of being. You see, education is a way of being. That's how we live it, but we are not living it. And I think we are failing as individuals in that way. If we all just looked in the mirror instead of judging, because I'm sure many people, even, you know, as we know, people criticize in the way in which they watch something, they judge. And those are the first stages of listening. Instead of taking on the substance and the content of that speaker, they will rather criticize and judge first. And it's the same like how society is. So we need to really be different individuals, and we need to build ourselves in that way. And it's okay to be different as well. That's the thing. Our children need to be taught to be different, because if you are, I grew up in an area where it's predominantly English, white speaking, you know, whatever, English speaking, and, you know, Caucasian, whatever it may be, and I was the only one wearing hijab, but it did not deter me in any sort of way. It depends, obviously, with the individual. You know, you've got to be powerful, you've got to be strong in your belief, and it wasn't even to do with the family. It's just the way you are looking at certain things and all the different experiences. I felt more religious in a non-religious country than you would in a religious country, because it's my own choice. Just like how you have to raise children to say that they're going to pray not because Mama and Baba's watching you, it's because they're going to do it when they're not around. And that's what we're failing to do, because we're just doing it to pass those exams, to get to the next stage, to, you know, tick the boxes for the future, for marriage, to say, yes, they've been to the, you know, certain Islamic studies and they follow us a particular way. When someone wants to ask, oh, do you know this girl? Does she pray? Does she fast? You know, ticking the boxes.
But again, another example is hijab. And for, you know, if you do have a daughter, you are encouraging her to wear a hijab from a young age. But rather than educating her to be able to make her choice at a young age, they're being forced to wear it because culture and religion is telling you to, but they don't quite understand. And again, as they get older, they start to question themselves. Why was I made to wear a hijab? I don't understand what hijab is. I don't understand why I'm having to wear it, what it instills. So I think, again, that comes down to education, and to educate them from a young age to be able to, I mean, it's hard to make a choice like that at such a young age, but if you instill it in them from the beginning, then they will learn to love it from the beginning instead of having to look for the answers later on in life.
The other thing you just said made me think, it's not about just telling them from the beginning. I think at the beginning, children at that age are feeling quite, wow, you know, we want to wear it. They're, you know, they're quite happy to wear it. When they understand how they are being maybe restricted from it, there's different stages when you are actually growing up. Absolutely. And parents do not address those stages while wearing hijab. So when you're coming to that teenage years and you are being, you know, faced with conflict and restrictions and different areas, then they're not explaining to them that, yes, you know, or preparing them for that. It's just they're wearing it now, that's it. And the conversation does not continue. Exactly. The conversation does not continue. You see children, teenagers, youth, and, you know, early adulthood, there are different stages that parents, community, society, and individuals need to question themselves. The curiosity and that critical thinking in the brain is developing.
There's a yearning for freedom,
yes,
which young people, especially teenagers, have. And remember, in my last parish, there was a couple. She was Italian, and her husband was English, and she was very sort of, you know, full of life, and he was very staid Englishman. They went actually to an evangelical church, Holy Trinity Brompton, Powder. Now, they had a little girl. I once visited the home. I wanted to talk to her grandmother, and little girl was there, and she came out to me and said, I want my freedom. My parents don't allow me my freedom. I want to be free. And that was like a soul which was yearning for. And I felt, now, what has gone wrong here? And this child has to cry out almost, I want to be free. I want my freedom. Which is, freedom under God. It's freedom under the divine law. But it's got to be felt to be, it's coming from you. It's what you want.
Exactly. It's like, actually, when you were saying that, it just made me remember, like, I study and, qualified in NLP, which is neuro-linguistic programming, and you actually study language. And so even when you say, oh, I want freedom, for example, what does freedom mean to an individual? And we can teach freedom to be like, self-expressive, but self-expression can also mean being covered, for example, and that's freedom. But we're not actually showing that, and we're not teaching that kind of language and showing and opening up the different meaning between languages and the metaphors that are there, and we're just generalizing, and we're also assuming what these teenagers mean instead of questioning them. What exactly do you mean by that?
I don't know if we have to be, if it's so difficult to assume to know what they mean, because the idea of freedom is a pretty current idea in society. Freedom basically means freedom from all restrictions, including religion.
License. Freedom is
license.
To an extent.
But you can be free and still wear your hijab, and you can be free to.
Yes. But how do they look at hijab from the culture of freedom?
Yeah, of course.
They cannot ever see hijab as a choice a woman made. Right? Why? Because their fundamental belief is that religion does not give you freedom. Okay? So if you say, I decided to wear my hijab, and nobody forced me to, right? In the back of their head, they might be like, yes, religion forced you to. Yes. Religion influenced you to do that. Right? And this is restrictive because your hair should be outside flowing in the breeze. This is freedom to them. Freedom has an image, Right?
Yeah, there is a
driving
in
a convertible, with your hair in the breeze, driving down some Midwestern desert.
That's right? A particular mindset, obviously, and that's maybe quite a majority of people that think that way.
Exactly. Yeah. And if your kids are talking about freedom, I bet you, that includes freedom from music, freedom to go wherever they want to do, wear whatever they want to wear, speak whatever they want to speak, including choose their careers and so forth and so on. You see what I'm saying? But freedom, individual freedom. What the father was mentioning here is freedom within religion. That freedom religion itself frees the soul, right? But it traps certain, passions that are not conducive to spiritual freedom. You see what I mean?
It's funny you say that. I was thinking about that before the show because, to be honest, we live in a society that we want to be free and we want to do all of these things, but every country, every place, there is laws, there are restrictions anyway. It just depends what you found your circle in and what you're going to do. So as much as we even say freedom of speech, we know there's no such thing. So we need to really have to know how, that's what my point was at the beginning, is knowing how to define it and thinking of it in a critical mind and an intellectual mindset. And knowing the wisdom behind freedom, because there's no such thing really, if you think about it. That's what I'm trying to say. So we need to be able to understand this ourselves and then educate the young and the growing as well, because they cannot just go out and just drive on the left and the right. No, there's a particular way of driving, for example.
We're talking about,
and that you can use as an example for everything else. So you have a circle of religion, spirituality. You have a circle of, the country rules. You have a circle of different things, and that is your boundary. So you got to choose, and that's also, whereas, a restriction on so-called freedom. And that's how you got to look at it. So if you explain it like that, no matter what, as much as everyone says, life's, anything's possible. No, to a certain extent, it's not. There are restrictions.
A great philosopher, Kant, said the rules are what make freedom possible.
Okay,
You
that's
have to be,
interesting.
the rule, of course, is the moral law,
Yeah,
maybe,
yeah.
universality of a moral principle. So it's not the freedom is anarchy.
Exactly.
It is the freedom is completely floating, it's a kind of vacuum. But freedom is rooted in the moral law of rules.
Exactly, that's what I'm saying. So to analyze language and defining it and understanding the deep root of it, that's what we need to do, and be intellectual about understanding, and not just generalize, and not just give this very status quo, or this frivolous sort of way of dealing with it, like, which is on surface. The way I look at students and the way I speak to them, when they question me, I question them 100 times before I even answer their question, because they have to understand what they're asking. And you've got to go deep into that language, and where does that language come from? What does it mean? A lot of these things, a lot of it comes obviously from coaching, psychology and whatever. We all need to be coaches, really. But to be honest, it really does make a difference, because it helps you understand yourself first before you try to understand anything further. And where does it come from? And I think that's what's lacking, because we cannot just generalize. We really cannot.
I think when you reach that level of peace in your own mind, that's when there is freedom. And that's when everything does become free, again, to an extent. But until you reach that level
again, I will
peace,
question you, what does peace mean? To some people it means financial freedom. For some people it means to be in a relationship. For some people it means to be in a particular country. That peace is so different to each individual as well. And how do we define it in every day and age, even stages? My freedom at this age is going to be different to a peaceful, as an older person. Absolutely. So a lot of these things have to be taken into consideration. And I hope that the viewers, please do call in, because we still have a few more minutes left if you do have any more questions. I'm not going to come hard on you. But no, I mean, if there's any final words, because it's really important. We've obviously spoken in so many different directions. That's what I wanted to have a panel like this, because there's different perspectives. It's not just one clear-cut, question and answer. And we all come from different walks of life, different backgrounds. We experience different things. And the youth today are so important. This is our future. Yeah. We cannot ignore this fact. And as we know, the leaders that are coming up today, the influences that are out there, the role models, I don't blame society. We are society, and no matter what age and stage we're at, we still have that way and that 1 or 2 minutes, seconds, years, whatever, to make a difference. So we cannot just rule out. And there's also these psychologists that said, are you going to be ruled by society, or are you going to be the influencer for society? So that's how I look at it. It depends how you look at life. So, any final thoughts before we sort of end the show?
Yeah, I got a couple of final thoughts.
Are we going to go on to another show because of this?
Yeah, I think we have to think outside the box, right? I think, for example, we have to be careful. We have to walk a tightrope, yes, between individualism and the rights of society. The reality of society. In other words, look, contemporary education stresses the importance of the individual as a child. Yes. Right? And de-emphasizes the importance of the child as part of a community. Mm-hmm. All right? Yeah. Nevertheless, communities that they support, they encourage a child to think in terms of community. Mm-hmm. Right? For example, the different gender communities you have outside there, you're encouraged to identify as one of that community. But other communities, you're not encouraged to identify as that community, you see? But I think we need to also not only just be able to just empower the individual aspect of that child to be able to stand up as an individual against these challenges, but also to see that for that child to see themselves as part of a community that has a history, that has a common destiny, that it is up to them to help to take it forward at that particular level. I think it's very, very important to be able to do that. I think we also have to be able to not fall into the trap of, let's say, relativizing the religious definition of certain things. Take, for example, the idea of freedom. Yes, we have many different ideas of freedom, but there's also a religious idea of freedom, yes, which is fundamentally, that's what I mean, breaking free of being subject to our nafs al-amara bisu, being free of being subject to our passions and our desires that could lead us astray. Right? Absolutely. I'm sorry to cut you, but we've come to the end of the show. It really does sort of give me sort of like final thought that
what my whole idea of speaking about this was really to say that when it comes to our faith in particular, we have the individual and we also have the ethics and the morals. So we don't just consider ourselves and be selfish and be in a particular way. We have consideration, we have empathy, we have sincerity, we have forgiveness, we have patience, we have so many ethics and morals that we have to embody alongside our religion. Our religion is not just, one sort of sector. It is a way of life, and it's not just a saying, it is a way of being, because we have so much that we have to consider. And inshallah, we will continue probably after Muharram, and maybe with Sayyid Mohsen Shah coming back and taking over. I hope that you've enjoyed the series so far, and I've done what I could to give you some sort of insight, and apologies for anything that I may have said or done to offend anyone, but it's just really my own personal experience from my own profession with people that are talking about certain issues that I wanted to highlight with this platform, and bring in some amazing guests with me today. And I'd like to thank you all for your time, and inshallah we will be back with a new season after Muharram, and hopefully we will also use the next month to not just have the practice of rituals, but actually transform ourselves and better ourselves, improve ourselves, and make a difference to our lives with the coming months ahead. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.